Hey class, Tim Carey. We're going to talk today about Anderson's stage model for policy process. So the first stage is the policy agenda. So as we talked about earlier on in terms of creation of public policy, strength is to get something on the agenda, to keep something off of the agenda. So in the sense of the policy formation, in Anderson's policy process, you're looking at the first stage being the policy gets on the agenda. So it's something that's being discussed. Then policy formation. The legislature, the organizing group, the executive branch comes up, works together, and formulates a policy. So it's the course of action to deal with a specific public problem. So again, we're hearing about guns. And one of the areas that we go through is that it's on the agenda. Now, can they formulate a policy for it that they feel will benefit society as a whole? So that's the challenging thing. That's working together to come up with a consensus to negotiate. And I think that's key to the American policy system, is that the two different sides of the aisle, meaning the Democrats and the Republicans, negotiate something out, and it becomes the policy begins to be formed. And then we adopt the policy. So the adoption of the policy is developed, and the support needed for the policy to be authorized. So the authorization of a policy usually means the authorization of a program. We'll use that. So there has to be somebody who oversees the policy, who's implementing the policy, and it has to be something that is vague enough that it can fit into a lot of different interpretations. Then the policy gets implemented. So the fourth stage is implementation. So now we see the application of the policy by the government agency. So how does it work? What was the initial goal in mind to accomplish taking place? So this is where sometimes the problems come in, because does the governmental agency implement the policy in a way that it was intended to be? And that's where lawsuits come in pretty frequently, pretty often during the implementation phase. And then they evaluate it. At the end, everything should be evaluated. Is what we're doing achieving the goals that the efforts, the money, what is being spent, all of these things, are they hitting the intended goal? So we look at it from that standpoint. Is it achieving what it needs to be achieved? Now, politics can be the art of the possible. We've seen, a Republican president working closely with a Democratic senator. Look at George Bush and Ted Kennedy came together and worked on No Child Left Behind, even though it may not, during the evaluation phase and the implementation phase, it may not have looked exactly the way both sides, or more so Kennedy, wanted it to look. But they worked together. They negotiated something out, and it became a public policy. So all proposals do not receive the same support, right? So some things will fly off the agenda. Everybody gives it the thumbs up. Yeah, it makes sense. Both sides can sell it to their constituents, and it gets the thumbs up and it moves. But sometimes that isn't the case, and these things get stuck in that implementation, or the adoption phase. Proposals must receive broad support. The last thing you want as a politician, and I know I've said this numerous times, is for that. You don't want to awaken the masses. You don't want something to get implemented, or something to upset your voters, because your ultimate goal is to get elected, right? You want to get elected. If you upset people, they're not going to vote for you again, and that could be problematic to your future elections. Then you have compromise. Is there compromise taking place? Like, if I give you X, will you give me Y, from a political standpoint? That's the art of negotiating. If you have to compromise sometimes for the law to go into play, and you may have to. We're looking at it back with the public policy that we were talking about yesterday, in terms of incrementalism. Sometimes you got to compromise. You say, okay, well, this isn't exactly what I wanted, and this happens very, very often when it comes to the environmental protection, our clean air laws and things of that nature. There's kind of a compromise. Well, we can't go as far as the president wants us to go, but we can come to an agreement that we need to decrease the amount of greenhouse gases going up in the environment, and or cut the supply of oil, or push for more electric cars. Bargaining. I became so aggressive there it fell. Bargaining actors need to come back to their constituents with something. You want to come back and say, look what I got us. I'm working hard. And that leads to the whole idea of, I hate Congress, but I love my congressman because he does a good job. He comes back to us and says, look how hard I worked. I got this done for you. Many factors are weighed in the decision process, especially constituency interests. Is this going to get me elected again? If I'm, are people going to run against me on this in the future and beat me? One of the issues in Philadelphia many years ago was the DROP program, where a lot of politicians put themselves in this program, and they could retire for a day, collect a full pension, that they had paid into, and then the support of the taxpayers, and it really upset the voters, and they came out in full force at that point. Public opinion. Is this a good law? Is this something that the public really wants? Is it, you're not going to please everybody all the time. Believe me, we all know that. But public opinion, are people, somewhat giving it the thumbs up? You don't want this is terrible. But you want, something like, yeah, I like it. At least they're trying. They're trying to push, and they're working together. Most of the time, and it's sometimes sad, but its reality is that politicians sometimes vote along party lines. Democrats stick together, Republicans stick together in Congress, and there's no negotiating, there's no compromise, and we kind of get stuck in that area. So the policy doesn't get formulated and doesn't get the attention it may need, because both sides are just kind of split, because again they don't want to upset their constituency. The rules in the decision-making process, it has to go to committee, then it comes out of committee, they vote on it, may have to go back to committee for some, and then they put riders on. There's all these different the rules in the process that could slow things down as well. There's values in the system, so you got to your own values, your constituency values, the organization's values. There's values throughout the process, and sometimes they may not be rational. The values that we're talking about may not be rational values, so that causes the policy process to slow, and sometimes to be halted or stopped. So policies, again, very important. There's implementation of policies and programs. So you get a policy and you get a program, and it's a federal level. So it goes to the Department of Defense, Social Security, Homeland Security. They're just a few of the examples. So they're strictly at the federal level, and they may trickle down into the state and local level, but they're predominantly federal programs. All right, and if there's a policy implemented in those areas, it's a federal policy. Other programs are implemented at the state or local level. Education, we always know, is a local situation, local. Even though we have state control over some of our school districts, it's a local it's a local situation where the policies that are implemented are typically implemented at the local level. Highways and roads, states, local. We have the streets department in the city of Philadelphia that maintains our streets. Highways in the state of Pennsylvania, unless it's federal highway, would be maintained by the state. Usually it is a user fee. It takes care of that when you pay your tolls. When you pay your tolls. Welfare, is usually a state program, even though some money comes from the federal government. You have the government agencies that are in control of this. There are a lot of pressures on government agencies and various oversights that come from judicial review. Is the government agency following the policy to the letter of the law, or are they overstepping their bounds? a few years ago, one situation was the IRS. The IRS was targeting people based on their voter registration, if I remember correctly, and that's not part of the policy for the IRS to even look at. Their job is to look at everybody the same. There's political pressures. A party doesn't agree with legislation, and pressures put on the agency who's implementing the policy. So if we don't agree with it, we're going to come at you and say maybe you're not handling this the correct way. Media, we all understand that they put pressure on a policy. They'll investigate a policy. They'll investigate how the agency is using the policy, and then interest groups. If something's being implemented that they're not in favor of, or they are in favor of, they'll either be support or against the agency that is implementing the policy. So I think that gives us a good oversight of the policy process from implementation. From discussion down to evaluation, from the proposal standpoint until when it gets on the agenda, all the way down through how it's being evaluated. So, any questions or concerns, always feel free to email me. Again, homework's not due until this Sunday. Any questions, email me. Have a great day.